O'clock in the morning. We've got a meeting of the Finance Committee to discuss a proposed hotel occupancy tax. From the Finance Committee, I have with me Councilors Monto and Paniagua. Additionally, we're joined by Councilors Caldwell, Majoke, and Nave, and Ms. Jones-Rouser is somewhere around here too. Seated at the table with us is Frank Kaliva, and Frank, I don't actually know your formal title.
Chief Administrative Officer.
Chief
Sounds
Administrative.
officious, doesn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. So Frank, I was hoping that we could begin today with, a brief mention of our structural deficit and this particular item in a larger context of what we're doing in terms of revenue generation. So not getting into the nitty-gritty of this proposal, but acknowledging that it's part of a larger approach.
Sure, happy to. So the structural deficit, as you all know, we have made significant attempts. I think we still need to characterize it as attempts to close that gap. And we have gotten traction, but we haven't made it all the way by any stretch of the imagination. I think prior to the pandemic, we were much closer to closing the structural deficit. I think we were on a stronger path. When the pandemic hit, it was all new rules. If there were rules, it was a whole new world. And we, I think, weathered it exceedingly well, but we were very focused on what do we do to preserve the income that we have and the services that our residents need. When we received the ARPA funds, it was, I think to call it a godsend is not an understatement. And between our ability to spend that money on just absolutely needed investments, as well as plugging our own revenue gaps, and candidly being able to earn interest as the interest environment changed, was tremendous. However, coming out of the ARPA funding, as you all know, we've been declining in our dependence on ARPA funding in the general fund. We are once again seeing, without question, the structural deficit is still there. Call it $30 million, call it $25 million. It's somewhere in that range. And we are not, as the mayor says, continually, we're not going to cut our way out of that. Can we still reduce expenses? Yes, we can, undoubtedly. I've said this to my colleagues any number of times. I grew up in an environment, I've been doing this for a long time, I grew up in an environment where CFOs would look you in the eye and say, you can always find 10%. And you'd protest and they'd say, no, you can always find 10%. Can we find 10%? Maybe. But more importantly, we need revenue. And there is just no two ways about it. We need additional revenue. And we have minimal control over our revenue lines. You all know that. Property taxes. There is a limit to the burden that you or we can or should put on our residents. We're increasing again this year. This is the third time this administration has requested an increase and that the council has agreed, but there's a limit to what we can do. We depend heavily on New York State aid, and for the first time in ages, we've gotten an increase in that aid in the coming budget year, but it's labeled very clearly temporary. There is no indication, and I would suggest no intention currently for New York State to continue that aid. So our controllable revenue lines are few and far between. The mayor requested that we put together a revenue enhancement team a couple of years ago, and we have looked, I think it's fair to say, under every possible rock for potential areas of additional revenue. The rules that I gave the team were pretty simple. It's got to be the equivalent of $2 million annually, reoccurring revenue. It has to be achievable in 18 months, and it can't impose an additional burden on the residents or taxpayers of the city of Syracuse. Other than that, everything was fair game. Room occupancy tax, to get back to the topic for today, meets all of those criteria. It minimally, if at all, impacts residents of Syracuse. It is achievable in much more quickly than 18 months. And it will, when fully implemented, and there's a couple caveats that have happened since we introduced the concept, but it will achieve $2 million and more. Is it a panacea for our structural deficit? It is not. Is it 10% of the structural deficit when you look at it in percentage terms? It is. And that's not a bad place for a single initiative that doesn't impact residents and property owners to be 10%. We've got 50% already achieved of our $20 million goal. So we're well on our way with this one.
Thank you. And can you paint a picture of the local landscape in terms of other cities or municipalities that have imposed a local occupancy tax?
Yeah, absolutely. I was doing a quick search of the assembly docket just before I came upstairs, and we are by no means alone. There are any number of towns, villages, municipalities that are adding to their county room occupancy tax or are asking for permission to add to their room occupancy tax. And there are others in line. So we know that Albany is headed for a small increase. Buffalo has indicated to the mayor that they are in the process of asking for an increase. I had also heard from Erie County that the county itself was asking for an increase. I suspect those two are negotiating right now as to what it's going to be. Rochester, our other major competitor, if you will, or neighbor, is a slightly different scenario. Monroe County collects all of the room occupancy tax, but they pass $2 million of that automatically onto the city. So the city has decided to stand down from imposing a tax. Binghamton, the newest one in line, just decided that they are going to request the ability to add 5% to their county's existing 5%. If that were to go through, I doubt it will go through at 5%, but if it were to go through at 10%, they would be the highest in the state. So we are by no means alone. This is where everybody is headed, for all the reasons I just described.
So if we did this as a city, right? Thank you. If we did this as a city, can the county also tax them beyond us?
Yes, the county can always go beyond us. In fact, Councilor, in 2019, when we first began considering this, the county had asked us to stand down, which we did mostly because of the pandemic. I think partially out of respect for the county, but also because of the pandemic. However, in 2020, the county added 2% to their existing dollar amount. So the county has already increased 2% since we've been considering this. And yes, they could.
But they wouldn't override us, right?
Couldn't override us. It would be in addition to.
Okay.
Yep.
So Frank, with the 2% that the county collected, impose and collect.
They imposed an additional 2%.
Okay.
They went from 5 to 7.
Okay, so with that 7%, does the city get anything from that, just like the other
We
cities?
do not get anything directly from room occupancy tax.
Okay,
What we
so-
get is a portion of sales tax.
Okay, with that, our city, our hotel within the city included in that 7%?
Correct.
So why did we ask to be, at least to get it cut, just like other cities have?
So the mayor, when the mayor told the county that we were going to once again pursue this 2% with the state and with the Common Council, he did mention the agreement that Rochester has and said that if an agreement like that was more acceptable to the county, that he would be willing to entertain that.
I just think, Frank, it's unfair for county to impose stuff, yet we are included, yet we get nothing. That's That's unfair. And,
I'm not going to disagree.
right.
So
Frank?
oh, pardon me. Go
My,
ahead, Marty.
I'm sorry. My question is, it's a coincidence that Syracuse loses 2 hotels, and the administration said, well, maybe we got to add a tax. Was this planned, let's say 1-2 years ago?
Yeah,
I mean,
this has
why
been
didn't
a-
it come for the council then? Because right now we're hurting, we're losing revenue, we're losing these hotels.
Sure. It has been in the pipeline for a couple of years. And I think it was a question of when would the timing be right. And unfortunately, as we thought the timing was right, the market said, we're going to take 2 hotels offline.
Okay, so you think that was a reason why maybe a couple hotels were closed down?
No.
And I deal with the tax?
No, those closures have been in the works for quite a while. The Syracuse University had indicated for a number of years that it was interested in taking the Sheraton offline and turning it into dorms. We always knew that was in the background. The Crown Plaza is candidly, and it's what the industry calls aging stock. It's struggles to compete, and its owners have, it's turned over in ownership. They've struggled, and the new owners have a track record of turning those kinds of buildings, these old Holiday Inn towers that were built in the 70s, into residences. So coincidence, yes. Unfortunate, yes. But, not no causation.
Question. So on a bigger scale, a little bit more deeper than just the hotel taxes, are we in conversation with the university as they continue to build and stretch out and put more apartments and housing to support us financially? Being that, all of our resources, fire, police and everything is still a part of them. Is the mayor's office in conversation with them?
Continually. We have the existing services agreement counselor. Is it enough? No. Is it the only not-for-profit that has voluntarily agreed to a services agreement? It is. So it's never going to be enough when we have the high percentage of property that is owned by not-for-profits and off the tax rolls. That's certainly a significant part of our revenue problem. But I want to be careful here. Syracuse University is a large property owner, but they are not the only not-for-profit property owner. And they are, in fairness to them, the only ones who have agreed to a services agreement. But are we in continual conversations with them? Yes. And their agreement will be up for renewal in a year or 2. So we will start those conversations in earnest.
They're the biggest ones that take up most of our city, right?
They are the largest.
New York State, I believe. Yep.
I didn't know that, but that wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, we've got Matt in the background nodding
There
his
we go.
head.
Okay. I'm writing that one down, Councilor.
Yeah, can I piggyback off of Councilor Nave's question? Sure. You mentioned the right time. Given the environment he described, question 1 is, why is this the right time? And the follow-up would be, will this put our city at a competitive disadvantage, or will this burden the existing hotels?
So important question, and I go to the hotel industry itself for the answer to that. So in 2018, 2019, the hotel industry on a national level attempted to answer the question, does hotel taxes, room occupancy taxes, lodging taxes, they're called different things in different states, impact the economics of hotels? Individually, the answer to that is a fairly conclusive no. So as long as a tax is imposed reasonably, whatever that means, and in particular, it's used to offset clear expenses that a municipality has in maintaining or attracting a destination, the answer to that is no. In fact, there was a study that was cited in that larger study in 2018 that said, in fact, many hotels are able to pay the new tax from an increased margin. So they use it as an opportunity to raise their average rates slightly, pay the tax and add to their margin. So there is no evidence that an individual hotel will ever be, not ever, I shouldn't say that it will usually be negatively impacted. What can be impacted, depending on the destination, is convention business. Some convention business, I want to be careful here. Some convention business is very price sensitive, not all convention business. So conventions will choose a destination for a variety of reasons. They'll choose it because of price. They'll choose it because of amenities. They'll choose it because of convenience. They'll choose it for other guys. The fire chief. Syracuse has always been a place where the New York State fire chiefs like to come. Why? Well, it's convenient. It's at the crossroads. All their members can get here. We've got the fire chief, New York State Fire Chief of the Year. The Chief Mons is exceedingly well thought of, and his team are very well thought of across the state. We have a state-of-the-art fire tower, so they get to do exercises, and our costs are reasonably competitive. So price is certainly in there for conventions. The study that I'm citing from the hotel industry itself says the question is not how much tax you're charging. The question is, what do you do with it? So my answer to that is a qualified no. We don't think it's going to have a negative impact. Nor do the hoteliers. We certainly, the administration has asked for feedback from the hoteliers, and nobody's jumping up and down, but nobody has a huge concern.
So I'm glad you said that, Frank, because in conversation that I've been hearing about this, we talk about the types of conventions that we have here. I think currently right now we have how many hotels in the city that are
We're
operable?
at 2,600 approximately before the 400 rooms scheduled to come offline. So we'll be at 2,200.
But that's 4 hotels? That's
Within the downtown, it's within the Syracuse city limits.
Okay.
There's some small hotels as well.
Did you say 22, Frank?
It'll be 2,200 after the Crown and the Sheraton come offline.
Rooms or the hotels?
Rooms.
How many hotels?
I don't know the answer to that. My guess is it's 5 or 6, but I don't know the answer. It's got to be more than that.
And so with that number, how many annual, I want to say when I mean annual, over the past, let's say, 5 years, maybe that you can think about, how many annual conventions do we have come to the city? Do you know? Does anybody know?
That would be a Visit Syracuse question. I don't have that answer, Counselor. I can get it for you, but I don't have it.
Because I feel that the major conventions that do come here, like you mentioned, with the Fire Chiefs Association and everything like that, they like to utilize the city of Syracuse because of the convenience of everything. So does the Syracuse Nationals. I mean, the New York State Fair is not going to pick up and move and go anywhere. We have graduations from different various colleges here in the city of Syracuse. A lot of people that I know were not able to stay, even in Onondaga County, because all the rooms were taken. So I think the attraction of the hotels and people paying, I mean, the fees were up even during the Eclipse event. We saw how the whole entire, New York State went bananas just to watch something for a minute and 33 seconds. So I find that people will pay regardless of whatever it is. It'll be up to the hotels to, do their managing on their side. The process that's going to take with this, and I wish somebody from the Assemblyman Magnarelli's office was here to also help out with the process, because on our side it would be considered a resolution. What else would we have to do on our legal side, and also with the yes? Okay. All right.
Yes. Good morning, councilors. Joe Barry, First Assistant Corporation Counsel. So the home rule process is exactly the same as you did last year for the red light cameras for the school district. This resolution is telling the state legislature that you are in agreement with the proposed law because it's specific only to Syracuse. So by adopting this resolution and sending the clerk sends in appropriate paperwork to back that up, the state assembly and Senate will presumably adopt the law that's before you now in draft form, and then it goes to the governor, who of course can sign it or not. Once that process is over and the state law has become effective, by its terms, it's giving the city permission to adopt a local law to actually implement it. So we'll have to come back to this body with a detailed local law that actually talks about the administrative procedure to impose the tax and collect it.
And are we bound by the legislative cycle in Albany to do that second part, or can we do that whenever?
The cycle is such that if it's adopted, I know the Assemblyman's office has said to do it this session, they need it shortly.
Right. But part
And then-
2 of that, the actual local law, we can do that whenever, correct?
Yes, although I would note that under the terms of the state law, it's our authority to collect the tax is only good until December of 2026. Now, it can be renewed. A lot of these taxes tend to have these temporary authorizations. Our extra 1% sales tax had that for many years. They may have made that permanent, but so 2026 would be another point where the legislature would have to renew it.
And a quick question, how much do you think, with this tax revenue, how much do you think roundabout?
With the 400 rooms coming out of our financial model, it's probably going to be just under my $2 million limit. So at 3% with 2,600 rooms, we were at $3 million. At 2%, which is what the Assembly came back with 2,200 rooms, there will be an increase in average room rate. That's always seen. As soon as a tax like this goes through, average room rates tend to rise. So trying to guess at what that's going to be, I believe our portion of this will be about 1.75 million on an annual basis,
And
give
the
or
fa-
take.
The fact that we're going to apply the sunset to it, in 2-3 years, we can review this and.
Yes, they are traditionally reviewed and renewed, although that's at the county level. The cities, towns, and villages requesting this is a relatively new phenomenon by the last few years in New York State. I assume they're going to be renewed regularly, but we haven't seen it yet.
I think when the county did this the last time, their argument was that the money would be used to increase tourism, right? That's kind of always their argument. And what I'm hearing is that, well, what does Syracuse do to increase tourism with that money? And I think that the argument that I'm trying to make when people ask me that is, we have programming going on now that I would hate to see be cut. The city has, for the last 3 years, thrown money into festival funding to try to actually keep these festivals up. We have thrown money towards public art for the first time probably in the city's history, where we've actually been partners in beautifying the city and taking care of the city. I think with 81 coming down, we are going to be struggling to find money to continue that beautification. I think there's a real argument to be made here that I would hate to see those things cut.
I think that's a
And
really...
I missed some stuff, so sorry, Frank, to interrupt you, but we're throwing money towards youth programs that this is historic money towards youth programming. We're trying to keep all the pools open. We're rebuilding a greenhouse. Like, these are things improving the city that we have to keep doing. So we got to find more money.
Yes, thank you. Certainly, I share that point of view. The administration shares that point of view. I also want to add to that and say what tourists and convention goers care about is basic infrastructure, convenience, amenities, arts, culture, all in a single package. So they tend to make their decision based on all of those things. If any of those things are missing, if public safety is missing but you've got art, no. But if you've got both and the city is focused on both, you're truly making it a welcoming city, you're focused on both the basics and the amenities and culture as you describe, that's where you're going to get a convention. We need the dollars to be able to do that.
I got a two-part. Go ahead. Thanks. I got a two-part question, just for the viewers online. What negative and positive impact does this have on the residents? I'll let you answer that one first, and then my second question would be: can you list? In conversation we're discussing pros and everything like that. Can you list any cons that potentially could happen from your point of view outside of potential things, potentially, it will be potentially, but can you list the cons behind implementing a room occupancy tax for the hotels?
So let me start with your second question, listing the cons. The negative impact would really be confined based on my research, and I don't claim to be an expert in this business. I have been sitting on Visit Syracuse's board since the inception and worked closely with Visit Syracuse when I was at Center State. My understanding is that a very price-sensitive convention, this 2% might make a difference. It's not a sure thing, but that's really where it is. That what the industry says over and over again, and I think Visit Syracuse would agree, is that this tax is an afterthought. Nobody, you said it yourself, Counselor, nobody looks at what the hotel tax is on their bill until, unless you're a finance geek like me, until you go to pay the bill. It's an afterthought. Nobody looks at it. So that's the only place where there is a downside. As far as residents go, there is, unless you rent a hotel room, there is zero impact of this on residents.
Frank, a quick question. Out of the 5 or 6 hotels, do we know how many of them are exempt or at least under pilot still?
I don't know the answer to that question. I can certainly get it for you.
Okay. And once this tax is imposed, if they are exempt, how would they forward that taxes to the city?
I think that's a question for Mr. Barry. I don't know that they would be exempt from this, but
Correct. The exemption under the pilot for property taxes is completely separate from this room occupancy tax. What we would propose in the local law that you would subsequently adopt is the hotels would have to register with the Department of Finance and have a mechanism where they make quarterly payments based upon their records.
And thanks, Joe. So with this, with us imposing 2% on additional 7%, somebody that would be renting a hotel in the city would be paying 9%.
that's correct.
Okay, and the county would be 7%.
That's correct.
I would just,
Well, with the exception of DeWitt and Skaneateles, because DeWitt is now at 9 total and Skaneateles is at 10.
yeah. So I would just caution us, I mean, 2%, when you look at it, it's not a lot, but over time, as county encroach, it also encroach on the city. Somebody who's going to be staying in the city, it also raised that, which, if you look at 2%, it's not a lot, but when you look at it at 9%, it can get hefty. And
It can,
Right.
it can, Counselor. I would suggest that we know what the upper limit is. In the 1990s, New York City found the upper limit. In the 1990s, New York State had a 5% state hotel tax. And New York City decided, as the premier destination in the Western world, that it could go up to a total of, it was just over 20%. They couldn't. So we know what the upper limit is. They eventually repealed, went back down, and New York State repealed its 5%. So New York City's now in a more realistic, if you will, they're still in double digits, 14%, I think, total, plus a 2% excise tax. So there is an upper limit. Don't disagree with you. I don't think we're at it. I don't even think we're close, to tell you the truth.
Yep. And Nader, you had a question?
Frank, the 2,200 number, does that include Airbnbs?
It does not. So the tax would include Airbnbs. We estimate the Airbnb number to be, API has been doing some data runs. We think regularly listed Airbnbs are about 400, 450 maybe, in the
Those are the
in
ones
city.
we know about.
Those are, so that's actually data from a group that set up to help municipalities across the state manage Airbnbs. And we connected with them. They worked very hard on New York City's recent legislation. So it's not our number, it's theirs. So it's about 450, somewhere in that range. They would be included in this legislation. They are not in that 2,200 number. So
How,
we'd be
how
back
do we
up to
do
that
that,
26.
Frank?
I'm sorry?
When we don't have any mechanism yet to say who has Airbnb, who doesn't, how much, we don't have anything here that,
It's a great question. What the mechanism that Airbnb itself has established across the country is they will collect and they will pay the tax. So we go to them, we say as a municipality, this has been imposed, you are now legally required because they are the ones who are collecting on behalf of the hosts. They will collect it and they will remit it to us.
those are the ones that are only registered with Airbnb.
That's correct.
But what about the ones that are not?
We have
need to
no,
find them.
we can't, if we can find them, we will go after them.
But we don't have any mechanism. That's what I'm saying. Like, there's tons that are not, right? We know that. It's just what it is. It is. So, how do we go about it? You
So
know?
Sharon Owens, Deputy Mayor, City of Syracuse. Council Williams and I met last week about this very topic. He, myself, Frank, Owen are going to get together and begin to talk about just the city and how we manage. We want line of sight of who's in our city operating these short-term rentals, because it could be Airbnb, which is the most famous, Verbo. It could be then there are people who just under the radar, rent their homes. There's no mechanism that we can speak of that we can identify that, but we want to get line of sight at least to the ones that are legally registered for that purpose.
There are companies that do that. I mean, we could just outsource that.
Exactly.
Like a lot of cities do,
exactly.
right?
So we're going to start that conversation.
One of the things that's been suggested is that by some of our data folks is that a lot of this intelligence sits with water meter readers, that they know far more about properties than sometimes even our permits folks do, and we've
Makes
never
sense.
tapped that. So we're looking for a way to tap that.
Literally.
Frank, would the funds generated here, would this be a restricted fund or would that go into the general fund?
General fund.
General fund, okay.
What's the, to that point, I was going to ask that, what's the process of collection? I don't know if you said it already, but what's the process of collecting the funds? What is the security that we have to actually collect these funds from the hotel? And if they don't pay, or is it like an automatic thing, or what's the process here?
So as Mr. Berry mentioned, what we're authorized to do is to require that every hotel, every host of an Airbnb register, receive a certificate of authority from us to collect the tax. So obviously that's the first step. The second step is for them to file a quarterly return. So they are required to file a quarterly return the same way they do with sales tax, the same way they do with their county occupancy tax, tell us what their gross room rentals were, minus any not-for-profit or non-taxed rooms, and then to remit the tax that's owed. So we would know, we have a pretty good idea, particularly around hotels, how many rooms they have, what their occupancy rate is, so we can project pretty clearly what they should be paying quarterly, and if they are not paying at all, or if it seems to be consistently under the projection, the legislation allows us to call for an audit.
All right.
But we don't have any legislation right now that particularly, like we have rental registration for rental property for Airbnbs. So,
The city does not.
absolutely. So I'm saying I mean, we can say hotels, yes, because we can number, but the Airbnbs, that's far-fetched. That's like down the road, because we have to create some form of
Again,
legislation.
Councilor,
Yes.
right now, for the folks that are legitimately renting through a platform, the platform knows who they are, and the platform is required by law to collect the tax on our part. on our behalf.
The projected number, just under 2 million or 2 million plus, does that also include, was that study or wherever it came from, was it included with the Airbnbs, or is it just
We did
hotels?
not. The financial models did not include any of the Airbnb or Vrbo platforms.
Okay, all right.
Frank, I read that in the future, if someone wants to build maybe a hotel, we might give them tax incentives, and it's like a pilot program. As you know, we are still paying the price when we build Destiny. They're tax exempt still for another 12 years. They're not paying any property taxes, and that is a burden on the taxpayers because they are exempt. They're not paying property taxes. And I'm afraid that down the road, somebody might want to build a multi-million-dollar hotel project and we'll give them tax incentives. In other words, just like that. Can we get insurances down the road? I mean, we get out the pilot business because, I mean, it's hurting. It's what's hurting the city right now.
I see Mr. Ennis in the room, so I'm going to defer the hard questions to Eric.
All right.
Good morning, councilors. So Eric Ennis, Neighborhood and Business Development. I think what's important is looking at every single project on a project by project basis. I think that pointing to some examples like the Marriott Syracuse downtown, prior to that, the Armory Square Residence Inn and Courtyard Inn, those were projects that do have active pilots right now as we speak. Okay. But I think the reason why I'm saying every project is unique is that, particularly with the Hotel Syracuse, very complicated, long time vacant and underinvested in property, that in order for that project and that property to come online, those exemptions were a critical part of that analysis. And so it needs to be taken carefully into consideration. And part of this, the policy is to be able to increase the city's tax base, not diminish it. And so as part of that, I think we understand, we've recognized, and we've had a lot of conversations over the last couple of weeks, that there is a pipeline of new projects and new hotel proposals that are coming. Now, one of the key elements, though, this is a challenging environment right now to be doing hotel projects. This is still something coming out of COVID. Hotels and hospitality projects are not every bank and not every lender is actively jumping up and down to finance these types of projects.
If we do this, I don't mean to interrupt you.
Sure.
But if we say, okay, we're going to levy a tax, but we'll take care of it. See, when I read this morning's paper, is that how the city is still being burdened by that, a huge mall that promised us everything and never delivered, and the taxpayers are still paying that bill.
Sure.
That's what I'm concerned about.
So, and I think the structure and dynamic with the carousel and then the expansion is just extremely unique in that case. But with the hotel projects, for example, the ones I'm pointing to, is that just the last point I was going to make was around the construction costs, inflationary costs. Is right now we want to make sure that there's the ability to fill the gap of these two hotels coming offline and being able to address that. Now, at the very same time, projects that are pursuing or looking to receive tax exemptions through SIDA or through the IDA, they're also still paying taxes on what the current assessed valuation is of that building the day the project is proposed. So tax payments are still being made and contributed on those properties. It's just in the case of, if it's a multi-million-dollar project, those exemptions over time will start to accrue greater value. So, but very much hear what you're saying. I think there is a balance. We want to strike that balance, but we also want to make sure that in order to help fill the gap and continue to grow and be more and more competitive for greater conferences, festivals, things like that, we will need to bring more hotels online. The city does have certain tools we can use at our disposal to make that happen.
A 2 cent on the dollar increase to the consumer has very little to do with a pilot program. Sure. If anything at all. We're not talking, I don't want those two things conflated.
Sure. Yeah, and I would just, since I am up here, just speaking on the economic development element inside of it, is I think that we certainly want to make sure our city is a destination and competitive for these types of opportunities. But when people are looking at where they're going to go, where they're going to visit, and where conferences are going to be held, they're looking for dynamic urban environments. And there's a reason why Las Vegas, Nevada, and New York City, and some of these other communities are so competitive. It's because they have dynamic downtowns and dynamic urban environments where people want to be. So we have a competitive edge, but it is important that the city and our tax base is able to continue growing and revitalizing. So I think I'll share my economic development lens. I think this is an important piece in the continued and ongoing revitalization of our city to win future, opportunities for people to visit our city.
Thank you.
So, thanks.
Frank, have we heard from hotel owners at all?
We have talked to hotel owners, and I think the general response, Counselor, is, we don't love it, but it doesn't hurt us.
Okay.
If it were, if it grew to too large a number, they'd let us know.
Frank, and just as a follow-up of my previous question with the Airbnbs, Verbos. So with the hotel, the Sheraton and the Crown coming off, and any other additional properties that the university is pursuing to come off the tax rolls, so the 1.75 million that you suggest, what is our net based on what will come off the tax roll based on the ones that I just identified, and what we gain from this property occupancy tax?
So the 1.75 is after
The
the
400.
Sheraton and the Crown Plaza.
But any other additional properties that
I
are
don't
in
know
the,
of any other hotels, and if the,
not just hotels, any others that take away from our tax base?
yeah,
To the point of the structural deficit, because
Yeah.
you're saying that 1.75 would help us.
yeah, to your point, Nader, anything that came off obviously adds to the structural deficit. I don't know of anything that's in the pipeline to come off, but I certainly wouldn't be surprised to see one
Okay.
or two.
Going to Airbnb, so if the city was to coin a legislation to regulate Airbnb, would we be following the same, Joe? Would we be following the same protocol as we are doing now with the state, or this something we can do locally?
Yeah, I think it's important to note, as the deputy mayor had mentioned previously, that the tax is focused on what's termed short-term rentals. So Airbnb is kind of the brand name, I guess, for the new technology. The short rental market has a zoning component which can be addressed through zoning amendments, which Councilor Williams was interested in, and which we can pursue. And that's more to regulate the land use aspect of short-term rentals. The legislation before you is really an occupancy tax that includes short-term rentals in addition to hotels, motels. It's a very broad definition. So these short-term rentals would be required to register with the Department of Finance under the local law that we would ultimately do, and to file those quarterly tax returns. But that's really a separate issue from regulating them from, say, a rental registry perspective.
And just to add to that, most municipalities have agreed, because they have the authority to go to every individual, to your point, Councilor Caldwell, to every individual host and say, register and file a return. Most municipalities, to avoid that administrative burden, go to the Airbnb platform or the Vrbo platform and say, we're going to allow you to do that on our behalf so that we don't incur all that administrative cost of 400 additional hosts.
That's a much larger discussion, talking about the neighborhood impact of those short-term rentals versus just the financial impact on the user.
Exactly, without question.
Because there is a neighborhood impact. I mean,
Yeah.
it's different in different neighborhoods, but we have to have that discussion too.
Unquestionably, and you saw that in Skaneateles. Skaneateles's room occupancy tax was structured primarily at burdening the Airbnb business.
Making it more difficult. for
Making
them
it more
to do
difficult,
business.
thank you.
It's a
New York
safe
City,
space,
on the
Frank.
other hand, killed it.
It's a safe space.
It's a safe space. I'm not sure that's true.
I don't know if this was stated or not, but just out of my curiosity, what does it do for the city if we don't do it right now?
I want to be very careful here. What do we do if we don't do it right now? I think when the market right sizes in 2 or 3 years, we miss a considerable upside, because I would fully expect, if we don't take advantage of this margin that's available to us, someone else will. And that at some point, this market's going to right size. As Eric mentioned, there are any number of very real projects that are 2 years away from being open, maybe 3 years, and we'll be missing out on not 1.75 million, but maybe 3, maybe 4, maybe 5 million.
Counselor, I'd also like to point out that it's important that there's an alignment right now with our state representative around this issue. So I think we should also not take that for granted, also in the consideration.
Important point.
Anyone else on the 2%? Great, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, I do get one more question. I'm sorry. I think I missed out on this one, or maybe I missed it too. Why 2? So what was between, the scale is between 1 to 5. I'm taking it, right? And 2 was just a median, or how was 2% projected?
We requested 3.
Okay.
In
In the beginning, or at this particular
At this point, we requested 3% of Assemblyman Magnarelli, asked if he'd be willing to sponsor 3. My team, the financial team of the city, felt comfortable that the market could uphold 3%, and that the structural deficit certainly needed 3%. Assembly Magnarelli, after discussion with other city leaders and with the hoteliers, I assume, and certainly with the county, came back and said, I'm willing to support 2%. So obviously, I'm not going to say that we weren't a little disappointed about 1%, but 2% is far better than 0.
I would like to say thank you for coming and explaining this, but I also would like to now have a further on a committee meeting just to talk about our structural deficit, so our community can understand how our taxes come in and what goes out, so they can understand, what we have and what we don't have. But
You just made, Counselor, my financial leadership team's day. They will be so excited that you want to talk about that. Because they talk about it all day, every day.
Because it's difficult, and if you don't understand about the non-for-profits and all, what's coming in, what's coming out, and what our average bills is as a city, it becomes, everyone's just looking like taxes. Because I hate that we have to raise taxes for our constituents, but we also need to explain to them what's really going on in our community. So I'm looking forward to that.
All day, every day, here, over a beer, anywhere you want. Well, my team will talk about it.
All right, thank you.
Great. Motion to adjourn?
Thank you, Counselors.
Thank you.
Second? Thank you.
Second, third, and fourth. So my only concern with